Æthelstan, the first king of all England, 924 to 939. Before Europe called him king, England was only an idea, fractured by Vikings, rival lords, and old tribal borders. Then came Athelstan, grandson of Alfred the Great, a ruler so organized and strategic that he turned that idea into a nation. Crowned in 924, he was the first to unify all English kingdoms under one flag. He did it not just by war, but through law and diplomacy, marrying his sisters to European princes, writing codes of justice that still echo in British courts, and even standardizing weights and measures to tame chaos into order. His education reached beyond swordplay. He collected books and imported scholars to the royal court, fusing wisdom with power. Yet his memory was overshadowed by his grandfather Alfred's legendary halo, and the chronicles rushed to romanticize later Tudors. Athelstan had no myth, only results. One monarchy, one law, one England. He governed a map that finally stopped bleeding between its borders, and history barely whispered thank you.
Henry II, the architect of order, 1154 to 1189. When Henry II took the throne, England was exhausted. A generation of civil war had ripped the kingdom apart, barons ruled like warlords, and royal law existed only by rumor. By the time he died 35 years later, he had built the skeleton of English government that still stands today. He revived royal courts so even commoners could seek justice. His circuits of traveling judges became the foundation of the common law. He forced barons to yield castles and created a bureaucracy that ran on record-keeping rather than loyalty. He was brilliant, restless, and impatient, qualities that made him as hard to love as he was to replace. His rage cost him dearly. A quarrel with Thomas Becket turned into murder and haunted him to death. Yet it was Henry, not the saint, who gave future centuries their laws and institutions. Every judge's gavel and every parliamentary record still carry his outline, a visionary buried beneath his own temper.
Mary II, the queen who balanced a revolution, 1689 to 1694. Mary II's story is easy to miss because it sits between explosions, her father James II's downfall and her husband William of Orange's victories. When she accepted the crown after the Glorious Revolution, England was split by faith, politics, and fear of civil war. Mary was the only calm in the storm. Deeply religious but constitutionally minded, she supported the Bill of Rights that turned monarchs into servants of law. While William fought on the continent, she governed London with efficiency and mercy, restoring public trust in a system on the edge of collapse. She died of smallpox at only 32, but her quiet competence paved the way for the stable constitutional monarchy Britain still enjoys. Mary II proved that not every revolution needs a sword. Sometimes a steady hand is enough to change a nation.
Edward I, the Iron Hand who built a system. To many, Edward I is remembered as the conqueror of Wales and the Hammer of Scotland, a ruthless expansionist king. But behind the brutality stood a mind obsessed with structure and order. Edward wasn't just a warrior, he was an engineer of government. He codified law, convened the model parliament of 1295, and turned councils of nobles into something closer to a modern legislature. He standardized weights, trade regulations, and judicial processes so England could function as one coherent realm. His conquests were harsh, but his reforms outlived them by centuries. Edward's efficiency was so severe that posterity reduced him to an invader's shadow. Yet the machinery of English law and administration he constructed became the crown's real fortress, one built not of stone, but of rules that still hold today.
Henry VII, the quiet founder of the Tudors, 1485 to 1509. Henry VII's reign began on a bloody battlefield and ended in peace so durable that people called it boring. He restored order after 3 decades of civil war, but did it through patience and arithmetic rather than fire.
Using account books instead of swords, he rebuilt England's treasury, tamed overmighty nobles with tax audits instead of axes, and kept the crown out of debt for the first time in memory. He married Elizabeth of York to end a civil century and crafted the Tudor rose as a symbol of unity. He lacked his son Henry VIII's spectacle and his granddaughter Elizabeth's pageantry, and for that, history undervalues him. But without Henry VII's steady ledger and cold logic, there would have been no Tudor Golden Age at all, only more collapse in velvet.
Elizabeth of York, the queen who ended a century of war, 1466 to 1503. Elizabeth of York is often depicted as a background figure in other stories. Daughter of one king, niece to another, mother to the next. But by marrying her family's enemy, Henry Tudor, she did what generals and diplomats failed to do. She ended the Wars of the Roses. Her union stitched together two houses that had bled each other for 30 years. The White Rose of York and the Red Rose of Lancaster became the Tudor Rose, a symbol so strong it still marks England today. Behind the scenes, Elizabeth's gentle temper and piety calmed a court suspicious of its new king, while her children embodied the future of peace. History rarely credits the person who quietly stops the war song, but without Elizabeth's grace and strategic forgiveness, Henry VIII dynasty might have been a footnote, not a foundation.
Queen Anne, the neglected architect of union, 1702 to 1714. Queen Anne lived in the age between religious wars and industrial empires, an era of subtle politics where subtlety was mistaken for weakness. Yet it was Anne who presided over the Act of Union that fused England and Scotland into Great Britain, creating the state that would rule half the world. She supported the birth of a two-party system and allowed ministers to rule by law rather than favor, the start of constitutional monarchy as we know it. While her personal life was haunted by illness and 18 lost pregnancies, she still balanced courtiers and generals with steady instinct. Because she was neither a tyrant nor a showman, history called her forgettable. Yet every parliament and prime minister that followed stood on her blueprint. Anne's quiet hand forged the kingdom Britain still is.
George II, the forgotten general king, 1727 to 1760. He was mocked as stiff and German, a figurehead between the fire of his father and the drama of his grandson. Yet George II did what few British monarchs dared after him. He personally led troops in battle. At Deddington in 1743, he rode at the head of his army, the last English king ever to do so. Beneath his temper and accent, there was steady policy. He backed Robert Walpole and let the new experiment of parliamentary government stabilize instead of collapsing back into royal control. His era saw massive colonial and commercial expansion and a navy powerful enough to safeguard it. He died quietly on the loo, history's final joke on an unflashy man, but his humility kept the crown useful in an age when its arrogance could have killed it. George II showed that not every hero wears glory. Some protect it by staying ordinary.
Edward III, the warrior who forged a nation, 1327 to 1377, Edward III reigned for 50 years, half a century of plague, war, and unexpected prosperity. He is usually remembered for launching the Hundred Years' War, but his real achievement was nation-building. He reshaped law, finance, and identity until England felt like a shared idea, not a patchwork of lords. He strengthened the Commons in Parliament, rooted out corruption, and made English the language of official record in court for the first time. His military victories, notably Crécy and Poitiers, forged pride in a people that had called themselves subjects for centuries. The Black Death slashed the kingdom in half, but Edward rebuilt his realm with organization instead of fear. He turned loss into identity. He gave England its voice, and history barely remembers the man who taught it to speak.
James II of Scotland, the boy king who tamed the lords, 1430 to 1460. Crowned at just 6 after his father was assassinated, James II inherited a kingdom splintered by clan wars and noble tyrants. Scotland's great families had grown so powerful that the crown was a symbol, not a force. By his 20s, James resolved to change that, violently if necessary.
He turned royal artillery into a political weapon, crushing the Black Douglases whose fanatical ambitions had terrorized the realm for a century. Once their power broke, the monarchy reclaimed its authority and Scotland finally moved towards stability. He died young when a cannon exploded beside him at Roxburgh Castle, an almost poetic death for a king who had forged unity through gunpowder. James II's policies made possible the centralized, disciplined Scotland his son James III inherited. He's barely mentioned outside historians' footnotes, but his steel nerved the Northern Crown for generations.
William IV, the sailor king who modernized the monarchy, 1830 to 1837. After 6 decades of George III's madness and George IV's excess, William IV seemed a comic relief, an aging sailor with a shuffling walk and plain manners. Yet behind the self-deprecation was a crucial transitional figure. He approved the Great Reform Act of 1832, expanding voting rights and reshaping Parliament toward democracy without violence. He streamlined the Navy, advanced child labor laws, and accepted that a constitutional monarch's power was no longer to command but to consent. He knew when not to fight history. When he died, people grieved a man who had kept the crown relevant by being human. William's reign lasted only 7 years, but it was long enough to hand Victoria a monarchy reborn for a modern age.
Harold II, the last English king who almost won. 1066. Harold Godwinson was England's last native-born king before the Norman conquest, and he was better than history allows. In January 1066, he inherited a crown surrounded by enemies and kept it for 9 astonishing months. He marched north, defeated Viking invasions at Stamford Bridge, then raced 200 miles south in a week to meet William of Normandy at Hastings. His armies fought from dawn to dusk before the famous arrow, whether through the eye or imagination, ended the battle and the Anglo-Saxon era. Harold's administration was skilled, his leadership steady, and his downfall was not ineptitude, but exhaustion against impossible odds. He lost a kingdom and won a legendary warning that bravery alone can't outpace fate. George V, the steady hand in a shattered world, 1910 to 1936. George V was born to pageantry but reigned through fire. The First World War turned empire into ashes and kings into refugees. He saw his Russian cousin Nicholas executed, watched crown after crown fall, and somehow kept Britain's monarchy standing. He renamed the family from Saxe-Coburg to Windsor and visited trenches without armor of rank, making the royal image ordinary and therefore durable. While Europe's dynasties crumbled, he turned monarchy into service. George V rarely spoke grandly, but his silence became example enough. When the world burns, stay upright and useful.
Edgar the Peaceful, the quiet before the storm, 959 to 975. Edgar inherited a fragile realm and somehow made it calm. He faced no major rebellions, no invasions, no great wars, and history punished him by forgetting him. But it was his peace that allowed England to standardize laws, mint reliable coinage, and build the fleet that later repelled Vikings. He presided over the first national naval muster and the assembly of clerics that merged politics with Christian learning. The real test of a king is not how he fights battles, but how few he needs to fight at all. And Edgar passed it so thoroughly that generations after him lived off the stability he left behind.
Elizabeth II, the Crown of Endurance, 1952 to 2022. Her reign lasted 70 years, the longest in British history, but her power was not to rule nations, it was to outlast them. Through decolonization, Cold War, and scandal, Elizabeth II refused to let the monarchy crack. She mastered the art of visible neutrality, a queen who reigned by restraint. Behind that poise was steel. She adapted pageantry for television, opened palaces to the public, and let tradition breathe without breaking. Critics called her silent. History may call her shrewd. Elizabeth II did not invent modern monarchy. She kept it alive while everything around it changed.